Morning class. So today our lecture is going to be the next part of your upper GI tract. We have on the other end classes going on about diseases and the anatomy of pharynx. So today we shall continue with another part of your upper GI tract. So we will be talking about your anatomy and physiology of esophagus. Physiology of esophagus is nothing but physiology of deglutition. So the esophagus is a soft, collapsible muscular tube which connects the hypopharynx to the cardiac end of the stomach. In doing so, it allows food to pass from pharynx to the stomach. When a bolus of food passes through it, it can dilate up to 2 centimeters in the anteroposterior dimension and up to 3 centimeters in the lateral dimension. This name for this structure of the body is derived from a Greek word esophagus, which means isen to carry and phagos to eat. So this is how the name is derived. As such, the esophagus is 25 centimeters in length. It begins at the lower border of the cricoid cartilage, which is at the vertebral level of C6. It is a continuation of the laryngopharynx at this level. It descends downwards over the superior and posterior mediastinum of the thorax. So it is mostly a structure of the posterior mediastinum of the thorax, but it descends over the superior mediastinum also. Here in the thorax, it is positioned between the trachea and the vertebral bodies of levels T1 to T4. Further going down, it passes through the diaphragm at the level of T10 vertebral body, where there is the presence of esophageal hiatus in the diaphragm. Along with this, along with the esophagus, also pass esophageal branches of gastric artery and the gastric nerves through the same hiatus of the diaphragm. The esophagus finally ends at the cardiac orifice of the stomach at the level of T11. So these are the cervical vertebral levels. These will be important for you at Viva. This esophagus shows two curvatures. Both curvatures are directed towards the left. So the first curvature is at the root of the neck and the second curvature is near its lower end. Yes, the anteroposterior curvatures correspond to the curvatures of the cervicothoracic spine. So the anteroposterior curve of this esophagus will be in correspondence with the shape of the spine in the cervicothoracic level. So beginning at the beginning, in the embryology, you have already been delivered this lecture of development of pharynx. So you know that the primitive foregut is formed in the 4th week of gestation by a longitudinal folding and incorporation of the dorsal part of the yolk sac into the embryo. So this is your foregut, this is your longitudinal folding. So what happens eventually is that there appears a small diverticulum as in a projection on the ventral wall of the foregut. So this becomes your dorsal wall, this is your ventral wall. So a small diverticulum appears on the ventral wall of the foregut at the junction with the pharyngeal gut. This is called as a tracheobronchial diverticulum. Yes. So this tracheobronchial diverticulum, which is formed by the formation of this septum, which you can see here, this is called as esophagotracheal septum. So this tracheobronchial diverticulum separates from the developing esophagus by the formation of a esophagotracheal septum. So this developing esophagus is a short tube which extends from the tracheobronchial diverticulum to the future stomach. As the length of the esophagus increases, the heart and the lungs tend to descend caudally. Yes. So you will be told the layers of esophagus in the next few slides. But just for the sake of completion of embryology, just know that the muscular layer of the esophagus has circular and longitudinal muscles in it. This circular muscle coat is formed by the surrounding mesenchyme at 6th week of gestation, longitudinal coat at 10th to 15th week of gestation, and the esophagus at birth is 8 to 10 centimeters in length. So these dimensions are attained in the 7th week. So the four layers are mucosa, submucosa, muscular coat, and fibrous coat or the adventitia. So the muscularis mucosa is one of the parts of your mucosa. Mucosa consists of epithelium, lamina propria, and your muscularis mucosa. We will come to that. But this muscular mucosa, one of the parts of the mucosa, is developed in the 4th month of gestation. The blood vessels supplying the esophagus enter the wall at 7th month. The lumen has a few vacuoles, though it is partially filled at 7 weeks, and by 10th week, the lumen is completely restored. Okay. So the importance here is that both endoderm and mesoderm participate in the formation of the esophageal wall. The endoderm forms your epithelium and the glands. These glands are responsible for secretion of substance which lubricates the lumen so that the food can easily pass through the lumen during peristalsis. The mesoderm forms your connective tissues, muscular coats, and your angioblasts. So like we have spoken about the histology, it consists of a mucosal layer, submucosal layer, muscular layer, and there is an outer fibrous layer or an adventitia layer. This mucosal layer has an epithelium, lamina propria, and muscularis mucosa. This epithelium is non-keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. Yes. So beneath the basement membrane of this epithelium, you see the loose connective tissue which is called lamina propria. This consists of a very fine network of elastic fibers and lymph nodules. So at rest, you see that the esophageal mucous membrane is thrown into longitudinal folds just to increase the surface area, or during dilatation, it needs some space to stretch. So when it is non-dilated, you see that the mucous membrane is thrown into longitudinal folds. And this mucous membrane is the thickest at the lower end of the esophagus. The last part of the mucous layer is your muscularis mucosa. It just consists of longitudinal muscle layer. The next part is your submucosa. Submucosa mainly consists of blood vessels, minor mucous salivary glands which lubricate the passage of food, and they consist also of Meissner's plexus. We will be discussing this at nerve supply. So the next layer will be your muscular layer. This muscular layer has a outer longitudinal muscle layer and an inner circular muscle layer. So the upper 1/3, middle 1/3, and lower 1/3 of esophagus have different types of muscle fibers. So both the longitudinal and circular muscle fibers are striated in the upper 1/3, and they are non-striated in the lower 1/3. So in the middle 1/3, there is transition from striated to non-striated muscle. So this is called as a transitional layer. Yes. So the outer longitudinal layer, it is usually complete except for a small dehiscence at the upper end where the fibers diverge from midline, forming the Lamier's triangle. So can anybody tell me what other triangles of pharynx which are anatomically important to us you know of? The chat is open. Please feel free to answer. Anybody? What are the other triangles of weakness or dehiscences we see in the pharynx? Yes, so these triangles are your Killian's dehiscence, Killian-Jamieson's dehiscence, Lamire-Hackman's. It's Lamire-Hackman's dehiscence. So you already had a class about your pharynx anatomy. So you already know that Killian's dehiscence is nothing but the area of weakness where the mucosa can protrude through the gap between thyropharynges and trichopharynges. Thyropharynges and trichopharynges are both part of your inferior constrictor. Oblique part is called thyropharynges and your horizontal part is called as your trichopharynges mostly. So this is your Killian's dehiscence. Your Killian-Jamieson's dehiscence is an area of weakness between the oblique and horizontal fibers of your cricopharynges itself. Between fibers of cricopharynges, this area of weakness is called as a Killian-Jamieson's area. The third one is your Lamire-Hackman's dehiscence. It is the area of weakness between your cricopharynges and your muscles of the esophagus. Usually they say it is between the circular muscles of esophagus and cricopharyngeus. In this diagram, it has been described as longitudinal muscles of esophagus. Very good. Somebody has answered. Killian's dehiscence. Very good. Voice is not audible. Are you able to hear now? Are you able to hear me now? Please let me know. I can speak a little louder, but the volume seems to be at its highest setting right now. Okay. So these are the three weaknesses in the pharynx which we talk about, but mostly since we are on the topic of esophagus, we will concentrate more on the Lamere-Hackman's dehiscence. So when we get to the part of dysphagia, we will definitely be discussing these in detail. But for right now, you need to know that there are three areas of weaknesses in the pharynx. Yes. So the last, we haven't finished this. Yes. So there is an outer longitudinal and an inner circular layer. The inner circular layer is continuous with the cricopharyngeus superiorly, which is part of your inferior constrictor, and it is continuous with the oblique fibers of the stomach inferiorly. The last layer of the esophagus is, outermost layer is your fibrous layer or external adventitium. It is a dense connective tissue overlying the esophagus, and the condensation of this tissue forms your phrenoesophageal ligament, which attaches esophagus to the diaphragm opening, which is present at the level of T10, esophageal hiatus of your diaphragm. Okay. So the applied anatomy here, like one of you have answered, Zenker's diverticulum or hypopharyngeal diverticulum. It is a herniation of your pharyngeal mucosa to a defect between two parts of inferior constrictor muscle. Yes, so you need to know that the cricopharyngeus forms the upper esophageal sphincter, whereas the lower esophageal sphincter does not have any typical anatomical sphincter, but it still closes and opens. So this is contributed by multiple factors. What factors are these? These are the encircling fibers of the right crus of the diaphragm, the oblique fibers of the stomach. Yes, so this is the diaphragm. So the fibers of the diaphragm, the oblique muscles of the stomach, thoraco-abdominal pressure gradient. That means the difference in the internal pressure between the thorax and abdomen. There is a gradient. So due to that gradient, food is more or less passed from the thorax down below into the abdomen. Yes. So also the angle of His, which is an acute angle at the esophagogastric junction between the cardia of the stomach and the esophagus. So this is your angle of His. Okay, this is your cardia, this is your esophagus, this is your angle of His. And also the intrinsic muscle activity as such of the muscle of the esophagus. So these are the factors which contribute to the closure of the lower esophageal sphincter, though there is no actual anatomical sphincter present in this area. Yes. So this is the same diagram again, which we have just seen. So you have to know that the upper esophageal sphincter is about 3 centimeters long, and it usually has a resting pressure of 20 to 60 millimeters of mercury. So the changes in these pressures cause dysphagia and certain conditions which we will be talking about when we get to the pathologies. Okay. The lower esophageal sphincter is 3 to 5 centimeters long, and it has a resting pressure of 15 to 25 millimeters of mercury. So there are further applied anatomies like GERD, Barrett's esophagus, and scleroderma. We will talk about them when we get to the pathologies. Yes. So the esophagus as such is divided into 3 parts. How is this divided? This is a distance from your upper central incisors going down below. That is how the measurement is given. As such, it is divided into parts, which are namely cervical esophagus, thoracic esophagus, and your abdominal esophagus. Roughly, we have, to prevent decimal, we have just given lengths. The cervical is usually 4 centimeters, thoracic 20 centimeters, and abdominal is 1 centimeter in length. So the thoracic, the cervical esophagus, when we start, is the first part of the esophagus. It extends up to the suprasternal notch, from the level of your laryngopharynx to your suprasternal notch. Yes? Then your thoracic esophagus is next. It starts from the suprasternal notch where your cervical esophagus ends, and it is up to the level of your diaphragmatic hiatus at the level of T10. So from the starting of the esophagus at the laryngopharynx to suprasternal notch, we call it a cervical esophagus. From the suprasternal notch to diaphragmatic hiatus, we call it as a thoracic esophagus. And from there to the cardiac end of the stomach, as much as just 1 centimeter, we call it as an abdominal esophagus. So each of this has its particular relations. So if you can see this diagram here, you will see that this is your esophagus and this is your trachea. Trachea is anteriorly placed. Even in the neck, as in the cervical esophagus, you will see that the anterior most relationship is your trachea and recurrent laryngeal nerve. Posterior will be obviously your vertebral column with its longest polli muscle. On each side of this esophagus, you see that there is this lobe of thyroid gland and thoracic duct on the left side. Yes, so these are the relations of your cervical esophagus. So coming to the relations of your thoracic esophagus, anteriorly you see trachea with its bifurcation. Yes, you see your left main bronchus, pulmonary artery, pericardium is removed here to see the structures, pericardium with left atrium, and of course the diaphragm, because it's passing through the diaphragm tends to form an anterior relation. Here if you can notice, this is your esophagus, this is your vertebrus, this is your bifurcated trachea into bronchi. So this is the anterior orientation, this is posterior. So here you see that posteriorly there is the vertebral column, there is thoracic duct, there is azygous vein and terminal parts of hemiazygous vein. These are parts of your portal circulation. There is a systemic circulation and there is a portal circulation. So azygous veins are parts of your portal circulation. Then there is a thoracic aorta and there are right posterior intercostal arteries. So these relations which are posterior also tend to form the right and left relations of the same part of esophagus. So on the right side you see the right lung and pleura, azygous vein and right vagus. See, azygous vein here and the right vagus also form the right sided boundaries. On the left there is aortic arch, subclavian artery, thoracic duct, left lung and pleura, and left recurrent laryngeal nerve. So I'm sure you're aware that your thoracic duct crosses the midline posterior to the esophagus and comes to the left of it. So initially it is a right boundary, it is a right relation, but going further down it becomes a left relation. Yes, so this is something to do with the course of the thoracic duct. So this is your descending aorta. It has to come from the prolongation of the arch of aorta. This will be your left vagus. Okay, so this is the relations. Your abdominal esophagus, again it is only half an inch long. Approximately they have given a 1 centimeter detail. It enters the abdomen through the esophageal opening of the diaphragm at the level of T10 vertebra. Yes. So this is how we see it. This is the esophagus, this is the trachea, the bifurcation. This is the arch of aorta, continues down as the descending thoracic aorta. Okay. So the blood supply, there is nothing much to explain with these. These are some things which you have to just remember. The cervical part, only understand that you have to remember in a way that it makes sense. So don't say that some inferior thyroid artery supplies your abdominal esophagus, because thyroid arteries are somewhere in the neck. So in relation to that, you have to remember it. Yes. So the cervical part or the cervical esophagus is supplied by inferior thyroid arteries, which arise from the thyrocervical trunk of the subclavian artery. They also receive some amount of supply from your left subclavian artery. Yes. The thoracic part receives its blood supply from direct esophageal branches of descending thoracic artery and sometimes from upper posterior intercostal arteries. The third part of the abdominal esophagus receives its blood supply from left gastric branch of the celiac trunk, sometimes also from left inferior phrenic artery, which is a direct branch of the abdominal aorta. So the venous drainage. In the neck, the veins drain into the inferior thyroid veins. Yes. The thoracic part drains into your azygous and hemiazygous system. The abdominal part drains into left gastric vein. So what is important pertaining to this venous drainage is that there is something called as a portosystemic anastomosis. Just give me a second. There's something called as a portosystemic anastomosis. This is present at the lower part of esophagus. So what is this portosystemic anastomosis? It is nothing but an anastomosis between your systemic veins and your portohepatic system. So here this portosystemic anastomosis is formed between the left gastric vein and esophageal vein with a tributary of the hemiazygous vein. It has its significance, which we will be discussing in pathology. The lymphatic drainage. The cervical part drains into your lower deep cervical lymph nodes and paratracheal nodes. So lower deep cervical lymph nodes. So who is going to tell me the levels of cervical lymph nodes? How many levels are there? Just give me a number. This is from your anatomy. It doesn't have to be now. Yes, somebody says 4. Since I'm still waiting for an answer, it needs to be something other than 4. 7. Yes, 1 to 5. Okay. So your cervical lymph nodes usually are level 1 are your submental and submandibular. Submentum, this is your mentum. Beneath this is your submental nodes, submandibular. They come under level 1. Along your digastric, along your sternocleidomastoid, there are 3 levels of jugulodigastric nodes: upper, middle, and lower. Yes, so this lower is a level 4 where your cervical esophagus drains into. 5 usually becomes your posterior triangle lymph nodes. Okay. Then the next is your pretracheal, paratracheal, and last is your mediastinal nodes. So somebody who has said 7, more or less correct. So the thoracic part of the esophagus drains into your posterior mediastinal lymph nodes. This is again not a part of your cervical lymph nodes, and it also drains into tracheobronchial nodes. Then the last abdominal part of the esophagus drains into your left gastric nodes. So just if you know at which part this part of esophagus is present, more or less the drainage will be surrounding that area. Yes. So the nerve supply to the striated muscles in the upper half is by recurrent laryngeal nerve, which is a branch of your vagus nerve. Vagus is which cranial nerve? Yes. Vagus is which cranial nerve? How many cranial nerves are there? Okay, so yes, very good. It's the 10th cranial nerve. So the striated muscles in the upper half are supplied by your recurrent laryngeal nerve, branch of your 10th cranial nerve. The smooth muscles in the lower half are supplied by parasympathetic fibers, which are the esophageal branches directly from the vagus itself. So recurrent laryngeal nerve is the branch of vagus which gives branches to the upper half of the esophagus, whereas the vagus directly through its esophageal branches supplies the lower half. So these fibers synapse in the ganglia of the submucosa. Submucosa is the second layer of the esophagus. This forms the Meissner's plexus. So when the synapses are in the ganglia of the submucosa, we call it the Meissner's plexus. And when these synapses are present between the two layers of muscles of the muscular cord, then we call it a myenteric plexus. So there are two plexuses, Meissner's and myenteric plexus. So the sympathetic fibers are derived from sympathetic trunk and come either directly from the cardiac plexus or around the blood vessels supplying the esophagus. This esophageal mucosa is sensitive to heat and cold but insensitive to touch. The pain is poorly localized and majorly the pain we feel is usually caused by muscle spasm rather than by stimuli. Yes? So there are particular constrictions of esophagus. These are measured by a particular centimeter distance from the upper incisors. Yes, the narrowest part is at its commencement at the cricopharyngeal sphincter, which we have seen is at the level of C6. This we see at 15 centimeters from the level of your upper incisors in measurement. The next constriction is approximately at 25 centimeters, precisely at 22.5 from the incisors is where the esophagus is crossed by the arch of aorta. This corresponds to the level of T4. Okay, this is all important for your viva. The next constriction is approximately at 27 centimeters, more precisely at 27.5. This is at the level of T6. This is where the esophagus is crossed by the left principal bronchus. So you know that at level of T4, T5, you see tracheal bifurcation, and where your left principal bronchus crosses your esophagus, you have the third constriction of the esophagus. The last one is precisely at 37.5 centimeters, or approximately, let's keep it around 40 centimeters from the incisors. This is at the level of T10. Okay, that is the esophageal hiatus of the diaphragm through which the esophagus becomes abdominal esophagus from thoracic esophagus. The pharyngoesophageal junction is the narrowest part of the alimentary canal except for the area of the vermiform appendix. So I'd like to show you a video before we start the physiology of swallowing. Please let me know if you are unable to hear the audio from this file. It is a 3-minute video. So once you are done seeing that, I will explain to you again your physiology of swallowing. Yes, we will get back to this. So if you can see this, if you're not able to hear things, just let me know because I'm not very familiar with this Zoom. I hope you can visualize it. Yes. Please let me know if you cannot hear. This will be a 3-minute video. Just listen carefully. I will explain it to you after the video is over.
Swallowing or deglutition is the process by which food passes from the mouth through the pharynx and into the esophagus. As simple as...
So what you have to observe here is that this is a lateral cut section of the face. So this is your nose. These are your turbinates, superior, middle, inferior turbinate. This is the base of the nose. This part is the hard palate. This will be your soft palate. These are your lips, teeth, dorsum of the tongue. Yes, this will be your vallecula. Then this will be your esophagus. I'm sorry, epiglottis, the pink structure, that is your esophagus. Here, this will be the trachea. This is your esophagus. This is your vertebral column. So these are the anatomy that is present here. Just observe the movements of these structures. especially that of the tongue, the soft palate. Hard palate does not move, it is a bone. So the soft palate, the tongue, the epiglottis, and observe the esophagus. Okay.
As it might seem to healthy people, swallowing is actually a very complex action that requires an extremely precise coordination with breathing, since both of these processes share the same entrance, the pharynx. Failure to coordinate would result in choking or pulmonary aspiration. Swallowing involves over 20 muscles of the mouth, throat, and esophagus, which are controlled by several cortical areas and by the swallowing centers in the brainstem. The brain communicates with the muscles through several cranial nerves. Swallowing consists of 3 phases. Oral or buccal phase. This is the voluntary part of swallowing. The food is moistened with saliva and chewed, food bolus is formed, and the tongue pushes it to the back of the throat, the pharynx. This process is under neural control of several areas of cerebral cortex, including the motor cortex. Pharyngeal phase starts with stimulation of tactile receptors in the oropharynx by the food bolus. The swallow reflex is initiated and is under involuntary neuromuscular control. The following actions are taken to ensure the passage of food or drink into the esophagus. The tongue blocks the oral cavity to prevent going back to the mouth. The soft palate blocks entry to the nasal cavity. The vocal folds close to protect the airway to the lungs. The larynx is pulled up with the epiglottis flipping over, covering the entry to the trachea. This is the most important step, since entry of food or drink into the lungs may potentially be life-threatening. The upper esophageal sphincter opens to allow passages to the esophagus. Esophageal phase. Food bolus is propelled down the esophagus by peristalsis, a wave of muscular contraction that pushes the bolus ahead of it. The larynx moves down back to the original position.
So I will show you this video again after I have finished my lecture of physiology of swallowing. So just to give you a rough idea of what happens, I've shown it to you. We'll get back to the lecture and I will show this video once again. Yes. So you have seen a brief video of the physiology of swallowing. So in description, the deglutition is a process of propulsion of bolus of food from the oral cavity to the stomach. Yes. So normal deglutition is a smooth coordinated process that involves a complex series of both voluntary and involuntary neuromuscular contractions. This is divided into 3 phases. Oral, which is completely voluntary. Pharyngeal, a mix of both voluntary and involuntary activity. And your esophageal phase, which is completely involuntary. So the oral phase, this is in a little bit of detail. I have managed to remove a lot of unnecessary detail for UGs, because in post-graduation, this is not even 1/5 of what we need to know about deglutition. But I thought there is something more than what is in your book that you need to know. So feel free to ask me if you have a doubt as to how much of this you have to produce in the exam. So the oral phase, or the first phase of deglutition, is divided into an oral preparatory phase and an oral phase proper. So preparatory phase is nothing but the phase where the food which you have taken into your mouth is readied for swallowing. That means it is cut and broken into small pieces and created into an adequate size bolus for swallowing. So this is done by reducing it and mixing it with saliva by the muscles of jaw and the oral cavity. So specifically solids, they are chewed, mixed with saliva and made into an appropriate sized bolus. The liquids are more or less poured or sucked into. That is, they are sucked into the mouth. Okay, and is maintained as a bolus. So here in the oral preparatory phase, you need the movements of the jaw. Yes, so the jaw has to be closed for you to chew. You cannot chew with an distant jaw. So the jaw needs to be closed, and this jaw is elevated by muscles like your jaw elevators, which are your temporalis muscle, masseter, and your medial pterygoid. So for this movement to happen, these muscles should have an attachment with the mandible. Yes, so all these three muscles are responsible for jaw elevation. The lips maintain under a seal under the action of your orbicularis oris. That is the muscle fibers around the lips or your mouth. So that is your, precisely the mouth. So that is your orbicularis oris. Yes. The food is returned from the vestibule by contraction of the buccinatum. Vestibule is nothing but the space between your gums and your cheeks. So the gaps into which the food can get stuck. By the contraction of buccinators, this food from your vestibule is pushed back into the mouth. So throughout this phase, the soft palate remains lowered and the anterior posterior pillars approximate. So which muscles form the anterior and posterior pillars? Yes, students, which muscles form your anterior pillar and which muscle forms the posterior pillar of the tonsillar fossa? I think the answer itself is in the next line. So the anterior pillar is formed by the palatoglossus muscle and the posterior pillar is formed by your palatopharyngeus muscles. So while chewing the food to cut the oral cavity from rest of the remainder part of your pharynx, what happens is that the soft palate comes down and both the pillars close so as to make this a closed cavity for chewing. Thus the oral cavity is sealed from the posterior and the airway remains open. So airway is from your nose behind. So once this oral cavity is sealed from the airway, so even when you're chewing, you can take in a breath from the nose, which will go back through the nasopharynx and your oropharynx, because your oral cavity is separated from your oropharynx here. So the bolus is progressively accumulated on the posterior surface of the tongue. So the tongue has a complete arch kind of a dorsum. As far as you can see is your anterior 2/3 of the tongue, whereas the 1/3 behind, which usually produces a gag reflex when touched, is called as the posterior surface of the tongue. So the bolus progressively is accumulated on the posterior surface by several cycles of upward and downward movements of the tongue. So when you chew, what happens? Your tongue keeps moving upwards and downwards. So when the bolus consistency is suitable for swallowing, this is sensed by your mechanoreceptors in the oral cavity, the oral phase proper begins. So oral preparatory phase is nothing but preparation of the food bolus, making it ready for swallow. So next, again, like I've shown you in the video, this is your tongue. This will become the posterior surface of tongue. Hard palate will be immobile. The soft palate can be elevated and depressed. Yes. So this is your epiglottis. This is your trachea, vocal cords. Posteriorly present is the esophagus. This is the area of your anterior and posterior pillars, palatoglossus and palatopharyngeus muscles. So when the food is in this area, the palate comes down, and this area, so the palate is coming down from above and the pillars close from behind. So in this way, the oral cavity is made into a sealed cavity so that your breathing can happen from your nose, nasopharynx, oropharynx, laryngopharynx, and into the trachea. Yes. So the oral phase proper starts when the masticated or your readied bolus is placed on the dorsum of the tongue behind the tip. So the dorsum of the tongue makes a longitudinal groove. So you have seen that the tongue is like this. Longitudinal groove as in the edges tend to elevate, whereas a groove sort of a pit sort of a thing, a longitudinal straw kind of an area develops in the midline. So for this, you need an intrinsic muscle of the tongue to act, and also an extrinsic muscle. Usually a longitudinal muscle of the tongue acts, and your genioglossus. These are responsible for forming this longitudinal groove. So when this groove forms, automatically what happens is, when the groove forms, the edges need to be elevated. So this tip and the margins get elevated. The tip of the tongue contacts with the hard palate like this, and your margins of your tongue contact with the teeth. So when you try to swallow, you will see that the tip of your tongue is attached to your hard palate, whereas the margins or the outer sides of your lateral parts of the tongue get elevated and touch the teeth. So by that way, the food bolus is imprisoned in the longitudinal groove of the tongue. The mylohyoid contracts and raises the floor of the mouth. So what happens? By raising the floor of the mouth, the tongue is also elevated and it's pushed against the hard palate. This pressure created obliterates the groove from before backwards. So firstly a groove is formed, the food is sitting there, the tip elevates, the edges elevate, and ultimately the entire tongue elevates so that this groove is obliterated. So by closing, obliteration is nothing but closing. This groove gets closed from anterior to posterior. So as it closes, this bolus is pushed backwards into the oropharynx. The compression of the mylohyoid on closed oral cavity pushes back the base of the tongue. Forget about the rest of the part. This propels the bolus with considerable force into the pharynx. The pressure of about 20 centimeters of water is developed in the posterior of the mouth, the pharynx and upper part of esophagus, and by contraction of the mylohyoid muscle. Yes. So see, so food is accumulated, a groove is created, it is set down. So slowly, I don't think this diagram is very accurate. I'll show it to you again in the video. The next is a pharyngeal phase, which lasts for about 1 second. So once the bolus passes the palatoglossus and palatopharyngeus, the swallowing becomes more or less reflexive. As the bolus is moved back by the tongue to enter the pharynx, a lot of events occur to ensure the protection of airway. So since the esophagus and the trachea share a common laryngopharynx or your pharynx as such, some precautions need to be taken so that the food does not reach back into the trachea. One, the food on swallowing given pressure, the food should not go back into the nasopharynx and the nose. So the direction of food should be downwards. Giving pressure, it should not go back into the nose. Third, it should not go back into the oral cavity again. So once in the pharynx, the food should be stopped from coming back into the oral cavity onto the tongue. So what happens? So to prevent any kinds of aspiration, there is a diaphragmatic contraction which is inhibited. The diaphragmatic contraction is inhibited, making simultaneous breathing and swallowing impossible. So either you swallow or you breathe, you can't do both. So this more or less prevents aspiration. At the same time, there is closure of the nasopharyngeal isthmus. What is this nasopharyngeal isthmus? What is the Passavant's ridge? Yes, Passavant's ridge is nothing but a mucosal bulge which is seen in the posterior wall of the nasopharynx. To this, the free edge of the soft palate. So when this is the pharynx, a Passavant's ridge is nothing but a sort of a projection in the, it's straight like this, it's a projection which develops in the posterior part of nasopharynx. So if you see this is a soft palate, the soft palate tends to get elevated and this ridge comes in contact with the free posterior end of the palate. So this is your nasopharyngeal isthmus. What this does, it prevents the food from going back into the, going upwards into the nasopharynx or your nose. Yes. So finally, as the bolus is moved into the oropharynx, a reflex closure of glottis is initiated. This is to again prevent the bolus from entering trachea and preventing aspiration. How does this happen? The vocal cords start to close to protect the airway. Not only the vocal cords, even the false cord tend to close. So the larynx is closed by the contraction of muscles of laryngeal inlet, aryepiglottic fold, interarytenoid, and your thyroepiglottic folds. Yes, so it resembles a drawstring purse. What is a drawstring purse? So women tend to carry this kind of portly bags. So there is two cords, and to tighten, you just have to push the cloth back while pulling out the drawstring. So in that way, from one corner to another, it happens to close and seal the glottis. The larynx is closed under the contraction of suprahyoid muscles in order to narrow the laryngeal inlet and move it towards the pharyngeal surface of epiglottis. So not only do the vocal cords and false vocal cords close to seal the larynx, what happens is that the epiglottis pharyngeal surface tends to come in contact with an elevated larynx. So the larynx, if this is an epiglottis like this, the larynx is lifted up to come in contact with the pharyngeal surface of your epiglottis. So epiglottis is nothing but a thumb-like projection. So if that is anterior, let's take this as posterior. This is the epiglottis. This is the larynx. The larynx is pulled up or elevated by your suprahyoid muscles so that this epiglottis can also cover the inlet of the larynx. The reflex closure of glottis is initiated and it causes an apnea of around 0.19 seconds prior to the elevation of larynx. So for this food to enter, usually the pharynx need to be widened, just like how a snake takes in its prey. As the food goes in, the sort of the snake body tends to widen in that particular place. So this widening of the pharynx happens due to the relaxation of pharyngeal constrictors and partially due to the anterior movement of pharynx. Yes, as the food passes over the posterior part of epiglottis, so the larynx has been pulled up and this is the epiglottis. The food passes over the epiglottis into the pyriform fossa. Solids go directly above the epiglottis, whereas liquids go from the sides. The simultaneous relaxation of cricopharyngeal sphincter needs to happen. So the upper part of your esophagus needs to open to take the food from the pharynx into the esophagus. So there is a simultaneous relaxation of the cricopharyngeal sphincter. As soon as the food passes into the esophagus, the pharynx constricts behind the bolus as superior constrictor muscle contracts. So the pharynx first dilates as long as the food is passing through it, but once it has passed through it, the superior constrictor tends to constrict again and increases the pressure in the pharynx so that the food cannot come back from the esophagus. Next is the last phase is your esophageal phase. Here the cricopharyngeus muscle relaxes so that the upper esophageal sphincter opens and the bolus is passed in through the sphincter and through the esophagus goes by peristalsis. Yes, so the details of this are that the tensor and levator palatini relax, that of the soft palate. So because of that relaxing, the soft palate is lowered. The laryngeal inlet which was closed previously will open now. The vestibule will open now. And the larynx which was previously elevated gets depressed. This is for you to understand. You need not write this down. So at the very end stage of swallowing, the glottis opens. So this is how the peristalsis takes place. There are usually mentioned are two kinds of peristaltic waves. The primary peristalsis is where your esophageal pressure rises to 50 millimeters of Hg and the pressure falls rapidly. This is nothing but your sequential contraction of the circular muscles of the esophagus. This causes a contractile wave. So it's more like a contractile compressive wave that migrates towards the stomach. So as the bolus reaches the lower esophageal sphincter, it tends to relax, allowing the food into the stomach. This is the main peristaltic wave. There is also a secondary peristaltic wave which arises in response to distension of the esophagus. This is for more solid bolus transportation. There is sometimes also a tertiary contraction of the esophagus, tertiary peristaltic wave. It is very irregular, it is not very propulsive, and it involves a long segment of the esophagus. So the lower esophageal sphincter is 3 centimeters long. It has a pressure of 15 to 25 millimeters of Hg, like we have seen. It remains closed except for the time where it relaxes to allow the bolus from the esophagus to the stomach. So the 3 main forces that move the bolus in a coordinated manner throughout deglutition are the tongue thrust pushing forces, the low pressure in the esophagus as the upper esophageal sphincter opens, that is called as the hypopharyngeal suction pump action, and the downward pharyngeal contraction movement for pushing the bolus. Yes. The neural control of swallowing, it involves a number of different regions. So These regions extend from the motor nuclei within the brainstem and go up to the cortex. Okay, the act of swallowing is regulated by sensory feedback. So as we see, the initiation of swallowing can either be a voluntary act or as a reflex as a result of stimulation of the mucosa of the oral cavity. This occurs during saliva accumulation or by the presence of food or liquid. So due to the anatomical and physiological close relationship between swallowing, ventilation and mastication, there is an extensive overlap in these brain areas. So voluntary actions of swallowing, this part should be written by you, if not the lower one, at least this. The voluntary part of swallowing involves bilateral areas of your frontal, prefrontal and parietal cortex. The frontal center is associated with motor control of swallowing. So what are these gyri? Lower precenter and post-inferior frontal gyri for oral phase, middle frontal and anterior inferior frontal gyri for your pharyngeal and esophageal phases of your swallowing. So the descending pathways project from the frontal swallowing areas of cortex to the medullary swallowing areas of the medulla. So there is an ascending pathway and there's a descending pathway. Yes. So there are a number of nuclei that are involved. These are nothing but your nucleus tractus solitarius and your spinal trigeminal nuclei. These are aggregation of your nerve ganglions. So this is more specific of the nuclei name for the muscles and their nerves. But as for your understanding, you need to know the involvement of this particular cranial nerves for which events. So trigeminal nerve and your spinal accessory nerve are important for your chewing and tongue movements. Your facial nerve is important for the sensation of oral cavity, anterior 2/3 of tongue from your chorda tympani, and your motor supply to your orbicular oris to seal the lips during your oral preparatory phase. Your hypoglossal is responsible for taste of the posterior tongue, sensory and motor functions of pharynx. And your 10th cranial nerve is mainly the vagus, which is responsible for many parts of it. Taste of oropharynx, sensation and motor functions of laryngopharynx and your airway protection. So what you need to mention here are mainly these areas. You need to mention the descending pathway, as in it relies in the medullary nuclei. You need to mention the names of these nuclei. And lastly, you have to mention these cranial nerves. So your swallowing reflex is a complex neurological event involving participation of higher cortical centers, brainstem centers such as the tract of nucleus solitarius and nucleus ambiguous, and your cranial nerves 5, 7, 9, 10 and 12. So this, you can go through this again. This is just an image of the same we have discussed. I'd just like to finish faster so I can show you the video again. Would you like to see the video again, or should I explain this neural pathway further? So in most, I don't think this part is very essential for you. So this is again your nerves which are involved in swallowing. Usually 5, 7, 9, 10, 11 and 12. These are the nerves involved. These names must and should be mentioned in your pathway. Yes. So I'll go back to the video and I'll finish the class by showing this video again. Any doubts, please go through this lecture and you can ask me. I have 5 more minutes. Maybe 3 minutes will be taken up by this video.
Swallowing, or deglutition, is the process by which food passes from the mouth through the pharynx and into the esophagus. As simple as it might seem to healthy people, swallowing is actually a very complex action that requires an extremely precise.
Like you can see here, the tongue is moving upwards. So mylohyoid is contracting, the tongue is moving upwards. It is coming in contact with the palate, then the bolus is squeezed into the pharynx. I will mute the video and I will explain it to you. So you can see here what we have discussed. The passavant ridge, this is the area. So the soft palate is getting elevated and it is getting attached to the passavant ridge, sealing your pharynx oropharynx from your nasopharynx. So the food is not allowed to go back into the nose. Yes. So again, here you will see after the bolus is prepared in the mouth, the mylohyoid is moving upwards. See again, mylohyoid moves upwards. So this elevates the tongue and this squeezes your food bolus into your oropharynx. The third important thing you need to notice here is this movement of your larynx. So the larynx is getting moved up. You can see that it is getting moved up. See, the larynx is moving up. The epiglottis is sealing the larynx. So there's some amount of thyroepiglottic ligament fold movement. So the epiglottis movement is very debatable, but the pharyngeal surface of epiglottis comes in contact with the elevated larynx. So it seals the glottis and then your food bolus is passing through the esophagus. Okay, I hope the class is clear. If you have any doubts, please ask me right away. I have 3 more minutes of the lecture with me still. Yes, anybody? So since you don't have any doubts, I might just resort to asking you questions in the next class. The next class on esophageal pathologies, which will be taken by me, will be on next Monday. So by then, I hope you stay prepared with your esophageal anatomy and physiology. Okay, thank you.